All right, so it's 2 minutes after 10 now, so let's get started here. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our first session in the May Adaptation Series. My name is Kimberly Hornaday. I'm Keela's Partnerships Coordinator, and I will be your moderator for today. I'd also like to introduce Sam. She'll be working on the back end of things today, so you'll see her in our chat box answering some of your technical questions. She is the lovely gal with 2 puppies at her feet today. Feel free to say hello and reach out to her if you have any sound, screen, or other tech-related needs. Before we get started today, I want to remind everyone of a couple things. First things first, this session will be 60 minutes in length, including a Q&A session at the end. That's going to be around 10 or 15 minutes. Throughout the presentation, we encourage everyone to ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. On that note, I know we're all Zoom experts by now, but I kindly ask that you make sure you've selected all panelists and attendees in the chat so that everyone can read your questions and comments. Keep in mind, we will be recording today's session. You're going to receive that recording along with the slide deck by the end of today in your email, so just keep an eye out for that. And on that note, on to today's discussion on the nonprofit web. As you know, your website is one of the first touch points between your organization and your prospect. It should tell your nonprofit story, communicate your impact, and convert visitors to donors and volunteers. So today, I'm pleased to welcome Ross, founder and CEO of CrowdSpring, to lead a discussion on how you can improve your conversion rates for donations and volunteers by optimizing your nonprofit's landing page and website. During today's session, we're also going to be collaborating live to deconstruct and improve some of your nonprofit's landing pages. So you should have received our emails recently asking for you to submit your own links and information. In today's session, you'll be able to participate in live constructive feedbacks and critiques on some of those links that you sent in. So without further ado, I'll stop talking now and I'll pass the mic over to you, Ross. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Let me share my screen. So just like in Hollywood Magic, this was almost instantaneous. Nobody noticed the transition. Thanks so much for sharing some time with us. We're going to have 2 parts to this conversation. The first part, I'm going to share with you some of the key principles around building smarter, better websites that bring in more volunteers and more donors and help you find ways to communicate. And then the second part, it's a non-traditional Q&A in the sense that I want you to participate with me in helping to deconstruct and critique constructively the websites from among the people on this webinar. So people have submitted 13 websites. We'll see if we can get through all of them. And we want to be applying the principles that you learned initially in the presentation. So you'll see a link on the title slide, and I know Keela will share these with you, to a conversion rate optimization guide. The principles that we're going to talk about today are illustrated in detail in that guide. On the last slide of the presentation, we repeat the link, but there's also one other thing. We give you a link to a nonprofit branding guide, which is also really important, and we'll cover some of the same principles. There's a slide on CrowdSpring. I won't talk about it. We've worked with nonprofits for 13 years. The only thing I'll emphasize is that we have a program specifically targeted to nonprofits called Give Back, where once a month we pick a worthy nonprofit and give them a free design project. Or our community works for free. We waive all of our fees. And so if you're interested, there's a link to the Give Back program, but it's crowdspring.com/give-back. So the most important thing that I want to communicate as we start the conversation is that the worst thing you can do, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit business, is underestimate the value of good design, because we are visual creatures. We look at other people and we notice the clothing they wear. We look at the furniture, we look at colors. And so we tend to be attracted to things that visually and aesthetically look good. And we tend to be burdened, bothered, and put off by things that don't look good. And so Dr. Ralph Speth, who's the CEO of Jaguar Land Rover, said it best: if you think that good design is expensive, you should look at the cost of bad design. And for a nonprofit, the cost of bad design means a tough time getting volunteers, a tough time getting donors, and having a really difficult time communicating your message. And the way that I think about it comes from a McGraw-Hill ad many years ago that I've adapted for the nonprofit world. And it was an ad targeting businesses. But ultimately, this is what happens when a person first meets your nonprofit. Could be meeting you at a webinar, it could be meeting you in real life, it could be coming to your website. They don't know who you are. They don't know anything about your nonprofit. They don't know your mission. They don't know your values. They may not know your community. They don't know your reputation. And the problem is that most nonprofits, as well as most commercial companies too, want something from them. They want a quick sale. They want a quick donation. They want this person to do something before they know you. So it's a tough, tough haul. And so how do you do a better job? The way you do a better job with your website is to improve the conversions. And let's just get a couple of baseline definitions in place so we can all be talking about the same thing. So a conversion is when a visitor to a landing page, and a landing page could be your home page, it could be a secondary page on your website, any page that has content takes an action that you intended for them to take and then completes a goal. So if you're a nonprofit, your goal might be to get somebody to subscribe to your newsletter. And so if a person takes that action, subscribes to your newsletter, they complete a goal, and that counts as a conversion. A conversion rate is the percentage of visitors who complete that action. And the reason rates are important is because optimization, meaning making things better, improving the performance, requires you to understand the rate. So if your conversion rate is 10%, meaning 10% of your visitors take the goal that you want them to take, you're trying to improve that rate. Can you get it up to 15%? So if 10% of the people donate, can you get 15% of the people to donate? And there are ultimately two types of conversions. There are macro conversions. And so macro conversions are about big asks. So it's about donating, it's about volunteering. And these are the dominant things that nonprofits generally will ask. And there are micro conversions. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why the color changed, but we'll live with it. Micro conversions are smaller asks. So things like signing up for an email newsletter is a smaller ask. It's not the same thing as somebody taking out a checkbook and writing a check. Creating an account, although most nonprofit sites don't have accounts. Potentially adding a product to a shopping cart if your nonprofit sells products, as an example. So let's talk about 15 conversion optimization insights. So these are 15 principles that I want you to think about as we get into the examples. The first one is a clearly articulated call to action. Think of it this way. What is it that you want the person who visits your site to know and do when they see your site as it loads in their screen? And here we're talking about the space, what's called above the fold. So this is, at the end of the day, what somebody sees when they first visit your nonprofit site. What is above the fold appearing on their screen is really important space, because that's the space that's going to either persuade the person to read more about your nonprofit or leave. And so what is it that you're asking them to do? That's a call to action. Second, you got to use that space smartly. If you have a lot of content, if you have a lot of competitive things, if you're asking them to do 4 things and are confusing them, that's going to distract somebody and cause them to move on. So you have to use intelligently. Number 3, get rid of clutter. So one of the important things about good design is not about what can you add to improve the design. Good design is more about what could you remove to make the design cleaner, more consistent, and easier. And in that sense, one of the mistakes that a lot of nonprofits make, and profit companies do this too, but particularly in the nonprofit world, there's this feeling that I've got to put everything I can on that page so that they know all my missions, my values, my photos, everything. It's like the kitchen sink. The problem is there's so much information that's competing for attention. People don't have the time to read all of it. So you want to get rid of clutter as much as you can. You want to limit navigation options. When you have a navigation menu, principally at the top, sometimes people have secondary menus, you want to make sure that you don't offer people 24 options. And there are 2 reasons for that. Number 1 is simple aesthetics. If you have too many options, it'll be really, really difficult for people to figure out what is what. The second one is even more important. When we see too many options, we become paralyzed. So it's called decision paralysis. It's actually a cognitive bias. And so lots of options get us to wonder, what step am I going to take? And if it becomes too difficult, most people simply leave. So keep it very clean. You don't have to put everything in the top navigation menu. Create a clear flow of action. And the way you should think about it is, what's the flow through your house? Or if you have a conference that you're putting on and you have different people talking, how do you push a person from one person to the next to the next? How do you control that flow? The same thing is true of your website. When somebody gets to your homepage and lands there, you want to ask yourself, where do I want them to go next? What do they need to know? What kinds of questions are they asking about my website that I need to be able to answer? And so you want to create a flow of action that both helps them navigate the page itself they're on, but also gets them deeper into your nonprofit to learn about the mission, the values, to look at some of the photos. Maybe there are videos. There may be other things that you're offering. So, wow, this is completely out of line. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Sorry. Let me catch up here. Because my slides have been jumbled up in some ways. So there we go. Next one. Copy is really important. Yeah, technology is amazing. Easy to read a compelling copy. This is something that a lot of people underestimate. Design is about two things. It's about visual design, so the images, the graphics, the logo. But design is equally about the copywriting, the words that you use, because words matter. And the thing that we see first are words. Now, it's true that images are critically important. One reason for that, we process images 60,000 times faster than we do words, which is why photographs and videos are so powerful when done well. But your copy needs to be clear and it has to be compelling. Otherwise, it just distracts a person. If they read something and don't really know what to do with it, and we'll look at the examples in a moment, it becomes really hard. And here's a good example of this. On the left is both of these are insurance companies. One is called Orange, one is called Lemonade. And it comes from a Twitter account called Good Marketing HQ, which talks about all sorts of marketing and copywriting optimizations. So on the left, Orange has this explanation of what happens, which is dense and 2 paragraphs of copy. On the right, you can see how this is done in a very different way. The number of words is much fewer, maybe 10% of the words, a couple of illustrations. And so almost every person looking at these two is going to agree that the one on the right is just easier. It's easier on the eyes. It's easier on the brain. It's easier to understand if you actually understand. And more importantly, if somebody asked you about it, you are far more likely to communicate what you saw on the right more correctly than on the left. You want to be visually interesting and consistent, meaning things that you do when it comes to visual design for your nonprofit brand should carry across your website and your marketing material. So if your logo has a certain number of colors in it, you should pick up those colors throughout your website on your page and use elements of those. Otherwise, what happens if you have a logo that's green, for example, and you never use the green anywhere, you're failing to connect the brand colors to the rest of the visual design. Or if you start using calls to action that sometimes are green, sometimes are red, sometimes are purple, sometimes are black, people get confused. They don't really know why those are different. And so keep it consistent. Ask for one thing. This is almost every single nonprofit makes this mistake, and most companies make the same exact mistake. We ask for too many things when you get to a page. We want you to donate, we want you to volunteer, we want you to sign up for a newsletter, and we want you to leave your firstborn. Figure out what's most important. What are people more likely to do when they first get to your site or they get to your site for the second time? And ask for that one thing. It's okay that you're not asking for everything else, because if you sit back and honestly evaluate what actually happens when people visit your nonprofit site, people aren't rushing out to donate the moment they hit your site. They're not rushing out to volunteer the moment they hit your site. So how do you start a conversation with them? By asking for one thing, getting that, and then moving on. You want to head off concerns. So landing pages, your homepage and other landing pages, are designed to try to answer some of the questions that they haven't yet asked, but want to ask or will want to ask very shortly. For example, one of the most critical questions that a person wants to ask about a nonprofit's site is, what do you do? You know, who do you serve? What's your mission? And so that's something that you have to answer. To the extent that you have some outstanding differentiator, like 100% of your donations, of people's donations, are used to fund the nonprofit activities, that's something that's significant, because some people wonder, well, are you taking 50% of my donation and paying it as salaries to staff? How is my money actually going to be used? So there are a few things that are relevant. And there's a question from Victoria: can you ask for one thing on each page? And that's absolutely true. So what I mean about asking for one thing is, on any landing page, have a dominant thing that you're asking about. And it's okay if you have a secondary request too somewhere on the page, but don't make a page where you have 2 or 3 equally dominant requests, because people don't know what's most important. So for each page, pick what you want a person to do and make that the dominant request. And it's okay to have a secondary one. You want to optimize load speed. So a lot of nonprofit sites are hosted on free hosts or inexpensive hosts, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to think about how quickly your pages load. And sometimes these pages don't load particularly fast. So 2 things happen. First of all, people are impatient, and if it takes too long to load your page, they may leave. Second is you get penalized in search results, because Google looks at the speed of the page as a way to decide whether you deserve a higher ranking. And so if search engine optimization is important to your nonprofit, if you are looking to get some organic traffic as a way to build your membership base, your volunteers, your donors, then don't forget to optimize the speed with which your page loads. You want to optimize for mobile phones, because the reality is today, lots of people find your site via mobile phone. And the challenge is, if your site is not responsive, what you see on a desktop, which may look beautiful, is going to look garbled and not particularly beautiful on a mobile phone. So the first thing you should do, if you haven't done this already, is take a mobile phone later today and browse your site to see how it looks. Does it properly communicate in a small format the same thing that your desktop website communicates? You want to use social proof. So social proof is important because we crave it. If we think about it, if you start a search for products, one of the first things I do is I go to Amazon. I look for the product, not necessarily to buy it there, but I want to see what reviews say about that product. And so social proof becomes important because we tend to want to know, do other people like this nonprofit? Do other people believe in this nonprofit? Have other people donated or volunteered? And what have their impressions been? And so there are different ways to do it. And I wanted to show you an example again from Good Marketing Headquarters. You could say, you can connect with the right people and become the one and only in your health and wellness niche. That doesn't have any social proof. This is from a for-profit example, but it communicates the essence of how you would do it. Or you could actually show it. So on the right, you could see that you have pictures of people, of avatars. You've got numbers. We've helped 258 podcasts rack up over 17 million downloads. So put another way, we've had 100 people volunteer helping thousands of people in these communities. Is a much better way to communicate social proof than simply saying we do lots of good work. And so be as specific as you can get. Jacqueline asks if you can access the slide deck after the webinar, and the answer is yes. Keela, I believe, makes it available to you, and I've sent it to them. So now, design for your audience. One of the mistakes that people make oftentimes, and this is a challenge, is that they find a designer who may do a great job designing visually, but the designer may not really be thinking about your specific audience. And yes, nonprofits are alike more than they are not, but in a sense, each nonprofit has your own audience. You have a specific group with whom you're talking. Your audience may be African-American women. Your audience may be people in the developing world. Your audience may be people that care about animals. And what those people expect from your site and from the design may differ from another audience. So when you think about what to include, don't automatically assume that another site includes something and you should include it too. Think about how the people that you want to be talking to connect with that. You want to have a clear and unique value proposition. This is, put another way, your special sauce. What makes you different from the other nonprofits? So nonprofits that are trying to help solve cancer, lots of them. How is yours different? Nonprofits that are trying to help build water sanitation in Africa, lots of them. How is yours different? And one way to do that is to communicate it both visually and just using stronger language. So this is an example of a Colgate ad, where on the left, introducing the new and improved Colgate, which isn't really a differentiator. Saying something is new and improved, saying something is better doesn't really communicate anything. Saying smile like you've never smiled before provides this chemical reaction in our brains, and the images reinforce that really nicely. So figure out what that special sauce is and how you can communicate it. Here is another example as a differentiator. So this is trying to talk to the customers. Again, I'm using examples from the for-profit world because I think one mistake nonprofits make is they look at examples from the nonprofit world, and there are lots of good ones, but most of them are not great. Lots of great examples in the for-profit space for how to copyright and how to create these hero above the fold images and copy that have really strong copywriting and strong content. And I would encourage you to not limit yourself to the nonprofit world as you look at these examples. So this is another example you'll see in the deck. And here's one that combines social proof and a bunch of things. A smile you love for less than $3 per day, and you have a lot of smiling people. So there's a lot of nice things here and a unique selling proposition. It's really inexpensive, again, for the for-profit space. So at the end of the day, and we're just about done with this, and we're going to move on to reviewing your sites where you get to participate. So 3 questions are ultimately most important whenever somebody comes to your site. Why should they do anything? Why should they subscribe to your newsletter, volunteer, click a link to read a second page, donate to you? Why your nonprofit? You're competing for attention with lots of things. You're competing for other nonprofits. You're competing with other for-profit businesses because a person can spend their money elsewhere. So you got to be able to answer the question, why your nonprofit? And the other most important question is, why now? Why couldn't the person just come back in a month or a year and take that action then? So part of it is urgency, building the urgency to explain why this is important. Part of it is the special sauce. What is it about your nonprofit that's so different? And why do anything has to answer the question, why is what you're doing important, particularly important to the person that's in front of you? Okay, so the last thing I'll say is don't stop testing. There are various platforms. If you're running your website on WordPress, there are plugins that let you do what's called A/B testing, where you can vary some of your copy or vary some images and test what works better. You can vary the copy on the CTA, the call to action, the buttons, to say one thing or test a version that says something else, as a way to try to improve the performance. How do you get more volunteers? How do you get more funders? Test constantly. You'll see my contact information on the last slide in the slide deck. You'll see a link to the nonprofit. I think I added this after I sent the initial version to Keela, so I'll resend this one again. But you'll see the link to the nonprofit branding webinar as well. Okay, so this is the part where it gets exciting and you get to participate. We're going to go through for the next 35 minutes, and this is an opportunity for you to do 2 things. First of all, feel free to ask questions about the concepts we're talking about. I'm paying attention to the chat, and if not, Keela folks are great. Kimberly will help. And what I want you to do is participate and provide your own feedback. You now have 15 principles that we've talked about optimization. So let's together look at these sites and let's look to see what they're doing well and what they could be doing better in connection with these sites. So let's start with Cohort Sistas. The first thing that I would propose we start with is let's talk about the top, the logo, the navigation menu, the buttons, and this area above the fold called the hero, which is the main image and the copy on the image. How do you feel about it? What do you think is done well? What do you think can be improved? And why? One of the most important thing is why. Why do you think could be improved? So I'll start as you're thinking. So just type your comments right into the chat window, and I'll highlight them. So one of the comments from Maya is there isn't a call to action, which is at the moment that there is one in the navigation. So the call to action here is donate. There isn't a call to action per se in the hero. right below the Cohort Sisters digital community that supports Black women pursuing research doctrines. And that's a fair statement. It may be that this is a missed opportunity to get somebody to get more information about it, or to try to answer the question, why is this important? Lori says, shorten the phrases to one word. And Lori, which phrases are you talking about? Because are you talking about the copy in the hero window or something else? And while you're answering that, one of the challenges for me, one of the things visually that's a little harder here, and because the site is beautifully done. If you look at the navigation, it may be the navigation has just a lot of stuff in it, and part of what might be extra is all of those social icons. They squeeze everything down into an area that just becomes a little harder to read. Now, if you increase the size of the screen, so I'm stretching the image a little bit, you could see that it kind of stays together a little bit, but doesn't really separate much more than that. And so make some good choices. If you don't have a lot of people clicking your social proof links in the navigation, then maybe consider putting the social proof links at the bottom, because you're sacrificing readability for the other pieces in the navigation to add things that are not used a whole lot. And so I think Caroline says banner tabs are small. I suspect Caroline is talking about some of the same things that I'm talking about. So we have this main hero image. So my background, yeah, by the way, I'm showing you, you're seeing some shelves on the sides. That's the background for the slides. So you'll see the slides in the browser window. So don't get distracted by the books around it or the talking head at the bottom. That's me. Ultimately, one thing I'll say about images, and this site does a really nice job using images effectively. Images, remember, 60,000 times faster in our ability to process images than words. So they're extremely powerful. We can get a sense of what something is about by quickly looking at an image before we can get a sense of reading. And so one of the things that we want to make sure is that the images need to help tell the story. If an image helps tell the story, if it reinforces what you're looking to do, those are beautifully powerful images and work really well. When images conflict or create some tension with the copywriting, with the words, then you're undercutting yourself and you're hurting your ability to tell that part of the story. And so, so part of that is really relevant. Maya says maybe drop site image and just use student's image, and maybe Maya's talking about the image of the door and the other piece, and that may be a good suggestion. In other words, part of what is, oh, Maya was talking about the books. Got it. Okay, but we could comfortably say that even in this image, for example, the door doesn't really help very much. It doesn't really provide much color or meaning to the image. So it may be that you still would want to edit it and keep that image focused on the women in the middle. One of the questions, remember, you've got to be able to answer is, what's your special sauce? What is it that you do differently? So if there are other organizations that support Black women pursuing research doctrines, and maybe there are not, and if there are not, then you should say that is the only digital community in the world that supports Black women pursuing research doctorate. If there are others, how do you differentiate? That's always really important. Let's scroll down a little bit. One good thing, so keep your comments flowing about the things we're seeing. One really nice thing about the use of space here is there's lots of white space. And white space is not necessarily just the color white. White space means that there's plenty of blank space where there's no copy, there's no images, is just nice and clean. And one of the huge benefits of white space is things are easy to read. You don't have a ton of stuff that you have to communicate. What you have to communicate is clear, and you're communicating just the important things. And so nothing is competing for attention when we look at this material. And Victoria's right. The statistic catches our attention. It's right in there. It's nice. It's a different color from the last of the copy. The branding picks up the color picks up the color from the logo. So if you look at the logo, it has this brownish color, and you could see that the calls to action are consistent, which is one of the things that we had talked about. One thing I'll say, I mean, there are lots of great things about this site. Make sure when you are deciding between readability and beauty, you always favor readability, in the sense that maybe this image needs to be screened a little bit more. In other words, made a little bit more opaque, because you can read, for the most part, this copy in the middle nice and clear, but the logo is a little tougher. The logo doesn't contrast nearly as well as with what's behind it. So there's one reason why people have navigation bars that are a different color from what you see in the image. Anyway, we're going to move on to the next slide, but I just wanted to show you the rest of this. Again, nicely done. You have small pieces of copy that are throughout the page. Where there's probably a missed opportunity here is to give people a chance to learn more about these. So if I want to learn more about intentional mentorship, I don't really have a way to do that from this box. If I want to learn more about resource sharing, I don't have a way to do that. If I want to learn more about the community, I don't have a way to do that, even though we have lots of other things that on this page that potentially could let us do that. Now, it's possible that there are not that many sites, and so that many pages on the site. And so the reason there's not a link to a deeper page is just there's nothing else behind it. But this is an opportunity for you to put something else behind it. So very well done at the bottom, and as well, to just kind of bring it up. You have information at the bottom to subscribe to updates. One of my pet peeves for nonprofit sites in particular is the first thing you often see is subscribe to our newsletter updates. Person just got to your site. They don't know anything about you. They are not likely to do that. Much better to put it lower down after they've read about the organization, and here's a way for them to potentially help. Okay, the next one is God will make a way. So very different. This is a simpler site using something called Website Builder. Ultimately, as I said, you're going to be using lots of different tools. Your budgets are going to be limited. You don't have to have a highly produced, the most beautiful site in the world. It's not about creating sites that can compete with the biggest for-profit companies. It's about creating comfortable sites that help answer some of the questions. And so that's ultimately most important. Caroline, I'm not sure what you mean. Can you repeat readability over? Oh, readability over design. So when you have a choice to make, and it's do this funky, interesting design or make something more readable, always choose to make something more readable, easier to read, because beautiful design is great, but if beautiful design makes what you're trying to communicate unreadable, it doesn't serve its purpose. Okay, what do we think about God will make a way? So one of the challenges, and Maya points this out, is not clear what the organization does. We have the name of the organization, which we assume is the name because it's the same as the URL. We have an image, which, it's obviously challenging for us to provide an image that could tell a story about God making a way. So we have to be cognizant of that. But we don't really know what the organization is about. There's not a call to action anywhere here. There are a couple of passages. And so it's really tough for somebody to know, well, what am I supposed to do here? I mean, the only thing that we can do is potentially go to some of these social proof pages. But at the end of the day, how is that going to help the organization connect with whoever it is that's coming to the page? So be sure that you include some of this. So if we click about here, again, there isn't really anything meaningful to talk about the organization. There's a passage from a C.S. Lewis story, but it doesn't really help me. So if I'm a visitor coming to the site, I'm not sure what the organization is, nor the action that I can take. Even if I wanted to help, I don't know how me helping will promote any kind of beneficial response. And the content, Kimberly points out, the content is not responsive. So what this means is when a site is responsive, and I'll use this example, the content will automatically adjust. So you see how things get smaller and larger, and they start changing the way they look. This is called a responsive site. When a content is not responsive, it means that it doesn't really change. So you could see how as it gets smaller, you start losing content. It doesn't change at all. So now you won't all have the benefit of creating responsive sites, but modern technology is inexpensive and lets you create these kinds of sites. So whenever you have a choice, find a site that's responsive because it'll look much better on mobile. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. So I use this tool called the Great Suspender to suspend my tabs, which is what you're seeing. So this is CISEPO. This is Canada International Scientific Exchange Program. So let's talk about, let's start at the top again. Focus on the hero, focus on the logo, the navigation, the call to action. What do we think? So Victoria asks, how do you optimize for mobile? If you build a responsive site itself optimizes for mobile. And we do have on the CrowdSpring blog some articles where we talk about responsive sites and how to build websites really well. You'll see us in the conversion rate optimization guide talking about this concept, and you'll find some links in there to building better mobile sites. So Caroline points out that about us and our work seems redundant, and that's a good observation. So this is one of the principles that we talked about. When you build a navigation menu, include only the things that clearly and crisply communicate what you're doing. And so one of the questions you should be asking yourself, exactly as Caroline does, is are some of these things similar to where we could combine them and make the navigation crisper and more consistent? Donate Now, Maya points out, is a clear call to action, and it picks up the color from the umbrella in the logo. So that's a nice connection to those two things. So Jane says the image doesn't convey what they do, and that's a fair statement. It's not clear whether the image does or doesn't convey, because at the end of the day, it's hard for us to see it. So if you look at the image and then you read our vision as an example, a world where individuals and societies work together to achieve improved quality of life and health for all, it's not entirely clear how the two are connected. And that's, for me at least, made even more confusing by the quote, because while the quote is good, it doesn't really communicate anything about the organization. So part of the challenge is, if you can't get information to a person browsing your site that answers the question of what do you do, who do you help, and why is it important, they're not going to scroll down and read paragraphs of text below that. This is the question you've got to be able to answer up front. Sam points out that more header options equal less conversions, and that's a good way to think about it. The more menu options you have, the tougher it is to get somebody to take action. And so anytime you can remove things. Obviously, if they're important, keep them, but keep in mind that more decisions create more hardship for people. Victoria points out there's a lot of text. So the icons are good, and they're nice, clean icons. They're consistent with the overall site visual design, but there is a lot of text here. There's a lot of copy, and part of the reason this copy is harder to read is because it's just sequential. It sort of falls one after the other. So if you look back to the way that this is presented, there's less copy here, but one of the reasons why it's more readable is because it's split up this way. So you see, you have some copy on the right, and an image to the left. You have an image to the left, to the right, and an image to the left. So it alternates, making it much easier to read through. And this is very evident in a lot of for-profit sites. And I would encourage you, when you want to communicate information, to think about doing it that way. Victoria points out the distance between the text and an icon is too small. You need more clear space, and that's probably accurate. So part of it is just the overall spacing here. There's some decent spacing between the paragraphs, so that's not at all terrible. But because these things are a little closer together, the icons and the text, it makes it a little bit harder to read. Now, Sam says iconography is tough. The Our Mission one is bigger. when it's likely not, but because it's wider. So that is a common issue, actually. You have to be sensitive to that ultimately. Sometimes, and I have this issue too whenever I do design, which is sometimes things that are the same size just look different. And so you have to cheat a little bit and make things different sizes so to the human eye, they actually look the same. And in this case, that could potentially help. The colors, the brand colors continue throughout, you can see. And so there's a, decent use of white space, and you've got some animation here, which is really nice to talk about the key projects, and you can jump into these key projects, and you can't really dive deeper than that. It just tells you where the project is. It'd be nice if you can get more information, and it looks like you can actually, so on some of these at least. So good, nicely done. And then you've got a news section at the bottom, and you've got a donor section and a nice visual view of here's how many members we have, publications, partner countries. This is pretty important information. This is part of the social proof. And so you might consider putting this higher up, because when I'm looking here, one of the questions I'm asking is, how popular is this organization? Does anybody else know about them? And so when I see that there are thousands of people who are network members, you've got lots of member publications, 44 countries are collaborating on this. That's important information. That tells me something that I would love to see up at the top. Okay, let's look at the next one. So North McIntyre Rec Center. So again, let's start off at the top. And I'll start while you're looking and thinking about it. One of the missed opportunities here, I mean, you have a picture of the rec center, but there isn't any copy there. So at the end of the day, the question is, what's most important here? So to me, the most important here is the information about COVID screening. And it may be that this is the most important information that this organization can provide to its local community, in which case that's perfectly fine. If it isn't, then you want to use that space a lot more intelligently. The other thing I would say with things like COVID, because this has been obviously a challenging year for nonprofits, it's much better to put COVID information in a banner at the top above your site as opposed to in your site, because that makes it easier to read at the top, and you can comfortably X out of it if it's in a banner at the top. That lets you keep your site pretty consistent. So Amy asks, what's the rule on text sizes for readability? Well, again, it's for your audience. So I'm a big fan of bigger text sizes. I have a hard time with small text sizes because it's just difficult to read. So generally we say the bigger you can comfortably make it, the better, which means different things. We use 16 pixel size on CrowdSpring, for example, for our copy. And we use bigger headlines for, so I'll just show you an example of our site just so you see it. So, 16-point text, and then the headlines are much bigger and more prominent. And so part of what you want to do is ask yourself, who's the audience coming to my site? If your site is ultimately talking to an elderly audience, people who are wearing reading glasses, then you can help them by creating bigger copies. So for example, like this image, in-person programs postponed. So let's see, let me do something cool right here. In-person programs postponed due to lockdown. Can't read it. It's impossible for most people to be able to see what that says. And that's a challenge, because at the end of the day, is just much too small. And so you want to make sure that readability is first and foremost the most important thing. Jane says the building image doesn't really let me know what I could do at the rec center. It assumes that I know. And in some ways, if it's a local organization that caters to the local community, it's possible that the local community is well aware of it, but you still want to reinforce that message. In other words, don't leave it to chance that the person comes to your site will know exactly what you do. It would be nice to be able to say, this is what we do for our local community. And so part of it is to trying to communicate, here's how we help you and here's whom we help. Otherwise, the only other thing I would say is there's the use of the brand colors, which has sort of black and two different shades of blue. So one part of the blue is in this button here, click here to complete screening, but I'm not seeing the other part of the blue picked up anywhere. And so maybe that's a missed opportunity to pick some of it up. Finally, I'll leave this last piece. this information we're currently seeing on the screen. So this is what I'm talking about. All the stuff here there's just a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff compressed into one space. We don't really know what's most important. Are the three things above the sign up form most important? Is the sign up form most important? Is the COVID message most important? You want to try to use design to differentiate the hierarchy of things and separate them enough so that people are easily able to tell. Okay, let's look at the next one, Manor Resource Center. So you have a video, and videos are very nice if they can communicate and tell a small story. And ultimately, again, remember, pictures and video, very powerful because we can react to them much more quickly. And if they reinforce the story, they help connect and tell part of that story. And ultimately, the question for you is, we're seeing this micro video. Is this video doing it for you? Are the pieces of copy that we're seeing make a difference and see lives change together with the video, helping tell the story of what this organization is about, Manor Resource Center. So Sam says, I like that the CTAs below the header match the header. And so there are two schools of thought on that. One school of thought says when you have this visual connection that's identical, it doesn't clearly differentiate enough. But from a visual design perspective, it has a nice symmetry to it because it pushes you more comfortably to focus on what's already happening inside the frame, which is a moving video and some of the words in there. Jane says, first thing I see is take action before I know what they do. And that's a fair statement. So ultimately, it may be that the video is doing a good job, but the story that is being told through the copy isn't necessarily reinforcing the video as much as we can. And at the end of the day, I think I share Nikki's thoughts, which is I'm not exactly sure what the organization does after watching the video. I mean, almost every organization can say, see lives change, take action, make a difference. Every nonprofit is about that. So what's the special sauce? What is it that you do that's different? That would be really important. So Alan says, would the videos here or moving images in the banner on the previous site lower the page speed number? The answer is they could. So it depends on how the images are optimized. These videos are very small files generally. They definitely could. If the rest of the information on the site is nice and you're doing other things that are optimizing load speeds like caching. So there are some great caching plugins that essentially will help deliver these pages faster to your users. Then it's not a big deal. So this is one of those areas where if you feel like an image or a video is compellingly helping you tell a story, use it. Don't worry about optimization, because at the end of the day, what you want is ability to tell a most powerful message that you can. If it's detracting from your story and causing you performance problems, then that's a time to rethink it. So Victoria says, in the first website, we said they did a great job explaining who they are, but don't really have a CTA in the hero text. Is CTA in the hero text necessary? Or is it more important for your audience to have a better understanding of you? So ultimately, both the explanation, the hero text, and the call to action are important. And in a perfect world, you would have both. Sometimes you may have a call to action in a different part of the hero. You don't necessarily need to have one in the hero. The reason to have it in the hero is because you want to control the path of the person on the page. You want them to take some other step. Now, in this case, Manor Resource Center, the button is donate now. And if you remember from our conversation, that's a macro conversion. That's a big conversion, a big ask. And one of the things that's harder to do with big asks is fewer people are going to be willing to do that, because I'm not going to see this video, and particularly if we're not 100% certain of what the organization does, and donate to the organization. I have questions. And so part of the question for the organization is, does it make sense to ask for a macro conversion, or does it make sense to put the person and go to a different part of the organization. So the who we are here, for example, learn about our mission or partnerships. Maybe this button is learn more or learn about our mission and partnerships, right? Because if nobody's going to donate when they first see the site, then you want to push people to a different page that's more likely to prime them to donate or to volunteer or to support your organization in other ways. So you have a contact us form right below that, but ultimately you have these call outs here. Generally pretty well done. Let's look at the next one. So eCala. Got lots of nice, interesting colors here, colorful logo. It looks like an Alberta organization. So interesting, you have an overlay that appears to have, let me reload it so we can see it. I see, it's just changing so this is a rotating carousel where you could know that it is because you have these left and right buttons. So there's a lot of content here on these carousels, on these images. So this is a good example where it's just really tough to understand, at least for me, what's going on because there's so many words and so much copy. And if you think about it, it's changing every 3 to 4 seconds. And one of the challenges when something changes every 3 to 4 seconds is I don't have enough time to read it. And so when you don't have enough time to read it, you get frustrated. So Jane says, I like the circle buttons, but not the rotating images. And so this is, I feel the same way. I think the circle buttons are a really interesting way, very creative, nice, colorful way to pick up a secondary navigation that connects with the logo. The moving images for me are also a little tough because I can't follow them. It just makes the site really busy. Probably better to pick a dominant hero image. In most cases, pick a dominant hero image that's important. So one way we do it on CrowdSpring, for example, is we rotate just the words. So we have 33 categories of projects, but we rotate just the kinds of categories. We keep everything consistent so it's more readable. So if you have some information to share and you could share it in this format, think about this format rather than rotating the full image because it's just really tough when you're rotating the full image. Stephanie points out that they also use abbreviations, and how would a new visitor know that? That's great comment. Be sure when you are saying things that a person visiting your site for the first time could understand them as well as you. One really nice way to do it is find somebody else at another nonprofit or find a friend and say, hey, can you read my site and tell me if you understand what's on it? Because there are going to be terms that you just naturally know and assume that other people will not know and assume. So, but otherwise you could see that, there's nice, decent white space, good use of color throughout. What is somewhat inconsistent about the site is there's some inconsistency around the designs. So you've got lots of things going on in the background, lots of different textures that maybe don't work nearly as well together as they should because there's so much other things going on. There's so much use of color that maybe you can de-emphasize some of these other textures, which for me are a little bit busier than they need to be. Okay, let me look at the next one. So Hydrocephalus Canada. Question from Steve, will I provide critiques of the sites you don't get to in the Q&A? Yes. I will send to Keela a couple-page document with some bullet point comments on the other sites. So there were, I think, 13 submitted. So any of the ones that we don't get to, I'll share with Keela and they will share with all of you so you can benefit from that feedback as well. So this is probably the last one we can tackle, Hydrocephalus Canada. What do we think about this one? I'll start because we haven't seen this example. You could see 2 calls to action in the navigation, donate and join our mailing list. And this is what I meant when I said, make sure that your calls to action are distinct. You want people to know that there's a primary call to action that's most important and a secondary call to action that's less important. And in this case, when you are including calls to action that are both exactly the same color and using the same font and using the same background color, you're not helping the visitor understand which is most important. Now, there are a number of different ways to do it. One way to do it is you can have join our mailing list without that pink background or purple background, but the join our mailing list could be using that color. So it's a secondary call to action, but it doesn't stand out nearly as much as it does now. So ultimately, it's a good use of color. It makes everything pop, but you can do better to differentiate what's more important and what's less important. Sam points out readers might have trouble with light color font against the white background, and that's true. So contrast is super important. And you can see, and this is what I mean by contrast, and what Sam is talking to, you could see in the navigation. So your brain is nice and contrast, so you can read it pretty well, but you can feel a little bit of eye strain when you get to the second one, hydrocephalus in youth. And that shows you the difference in contrast. Now, there are two ways to combat this. The first is to make sure that when you are laying one color on top of another, you are using colors that contrast really well together. The second is to improve the font. And so one way to do that, and let me just show you, we should be able to do this right in the live site. So in this case, let's see if we can do that. You can see I changed the font to a bigger font and how much more readable it is. So it just changes the bold nature of the font. So this is what it was, and this is what it is with this one change. And you can see how much more readable it is. So make sure for contrast purposes, you optimize for readability. And so you can do the same thing on these buttons. So let's take an example, the donate button. The donate button right now is, let's see, I'm not sure I'll be able to change that. So it doesn't look like I'll be able to easily change that, but it's the same issue in that maybe it's just a little too thin. You can make it more prominent by making the font a little thicker. Otherwise, the other thing I would say is there needs to be probably a bit more information and explanation on this page to get somebody interested. So there are lots of links, and the links are presented nicely, but the question is, why should I take the time to click the links? It's really important for you to communicate what it is about your organization that helps people. What's your special sauce? What communities do you help? Because I need to be interested to look further. If I'm not interested, it's going to be really tough to get me or anybody else that comes to the site to spend the time to dig further. Let's deal with any last questions. So there are I think about 6 sites that I owe some feedback on that I'll get to in the next couple of days. Any last minute questions to what we've talked about? While you're potentially thinking and typing, Sam says always better to use dark colors for those that are visually impaired. It's true, darker colors are better, but remember, color combinations are most important. So dark color on a lighter background works well. A light color on a darker background works well, but you have to also think about the thickness of the fonts and the size of the letters. So some colors just don't work nearly as well together. And so always err on the side of picking colors that are optimized for readability. Well, hopefully you got a nice benefit out of this. Do look at the 15 optimization factors. Take a look at the blog. It walks you through detail. What I was hoping to achieve, and hopefully we've done that, is to give you the tools to be able to look at your own sites in the same way, to ask the kinds of questions that you should be asking about your own sites. You know, what is my organization about? What action am I asking people to take, or am I not asking them to take any action? Do I have a single call to action on this page? Am I asking for something that's just too big, a macro conversion to donate, where I should be asking something smaller, a micro conversion, so I can get somebody engaged in reading about the organization? So all of these are important, and fundamentally, thank you for doing great work for people around the world. It's one reason why we do this for nonprofits. We value the work that you do, and that's why we try to help. Kimberly, any last words?
Yes, thanks so much, Ross. I do have, there were 2 questions actually that, if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask you really quick. Amy was wondering if you had any other workshops similar to this one coming up in the near future. And I think Caroline mentioned as well that she missed the opportunity to participate. So I was wondering if you know of any coming up.
I don't know of any coming up. We've done probably about 8 or 9 of these for nonprofits, and I'm trying to remember. I mean, Keela records the workshop, so I don't think at the moment we have one coming up, but we try to do these every 4 to 5 months and on a variety of topics. So today we talked about conversion rate optimization. We do one for nonprofits on branding as well, how to effectively brand a nonprofit and create that brand story. So not one that I'm aware of at the moment.
All right, well, I'm sure we'll all keep our eyes out for that whenever the next one comes up. And then just last question, we heard you mention that it's okay, to not have join our newsletter on the main page. Is lower on the page okay?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, think about it this way. If you meet this is the way I think about websites and landing pages. I think about what happens if I meet a person. So if Kimberly and I met in person and I had a nonprofit and she was somebody I didn't know, what would be the first thing I would say to her? And think about your website like the nonprofit. The first thing, I wouldn't say, hi, Kimberly, will you donate to my nonprofit? Or will you sign up for my newsletter? Because Kimberly's gonna look at me and say, well, I don't know anything about you. Why would I sign up? Why would I donate? So the most important thing I would say is, hey, here's what my nonprofit does, and here's how we're different. And then I might give her some examples. She may have some questions. And at the end of the conversation, I might say, you know what? We have a great newsletter. Would you like to subscribe? I might not even ask her to donate in that first conversation. So think of your websites like live conversations with people. Okay, so don't ask at the beginning something you wouldn't ask a person in a live conversation. So if you would naturally say, subscribe to a newsletter at the end, put it in the footer, put it below. If you would naturally ask about donation later, put it below or put it on a secondary page, which is why flow is so important. Because if you get somebody in the hero to learn more about your organization and you present information and pictures and you talk about your mission and the things that you've done and social proof, that may be a good spot to say, and you know what, we are always looking for donations. 98 cents out of every dollar goes towards the communities that we serve, or whatever the number is. So naturally include it on your site where you would include it in your conversation. So if you mentally picture yourself talking to a visitor, you can create a flow on your website that mimics a natural conversation. And from their perspective, this is how it sounds like to them. If you ask for donating in the beginning, it's, hi, I'm Ross. Can you donate to my organization? And none of you have those kinds of conversations. And so I would encourage you on your websites not to have those kinds of conversations too. Make them more natural and organic.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross. I believe that was all of our questions, and we're just over time here. So that concludes our session for today. Thanks for the fantastic feedback, Ross, on some of our own landing pages and websites. I'm sure we all as users have run into sites that could use some of those 15 tricks. So thank you for the very, very helpful session today. And don't worry, as Ross mentioned, we will be sharing his notes on the sites that we weren't able to get to today. So keep your eyes out for that. I'll just share my screen here. Perfect. Before we sign off today, I just want to let you all know that our next webinar in this May adaptation series is on Tuesday, May 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. The session will be led by Nathan Hill. Nathan is the marketing director for Next After, a fundraising consultancy and research lab. He'll be speaking on subject lines in your marketing campaigns and 5 mental levers that anyone can use to get more opens and donations. So if you haven't registered for that already, Sam will pop the sign up link into the chat. And lastly, I want to remind everyone that today's session was recorded, so you will receive the recording and Ross's slide deck by the end of today, along with more information about Ross and his work with CrowdStream. So thank you everyone so much for coming and for the fantastic participation in today's workshop. I'm going to pass it to Ross for a final goodbye.
Yep, enjoyed everybody's comments. Great job participating. Now keep at it. Look at your own sites and you can do the same kind of critique and look for ways to improve your own sites, because you're doing good work. But obviously when it comes to optimizing your websites, you can always, we can always do better every single day. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you again, everyone, for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Goodbye.